The first thing he said after 19 years of silence was not her name. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a question. It was this: "I have that right." That was how Andrew Rourke announced himself, not with any acknowledgement of what he'd left behind, but with a claim on what he'd decided he was owed. Natalie Hale was 42 years old, standing in her kitchen on a Tuesday evening in November, and the voice coming through her phone belonged to a man she hadn't spoken to since the night she walked out of their apartment 8 months pregnant, with one suitcase and one word. The word was fine. She'd said it, quietly gathered her things and left. That was 19 years ago. And now he was calling to tell her he had rights. She didn't respond. She stood there for a moment, listening to the faint sound of a television somewhere behind his voice, the particular background noise of a man sitting alone in a room he didn't own. Then she ended the call. She put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and walked to the window and looked out at Philadelphia, flat November grey, the city indifferent and continuous 12 floors below, moving through its evening without any awareness of what had just happened in this kitchen. She stood there long enough to feel her breathing even out. Then she picked up her phone and typed a message to her son. "There's something you need to know. Call me when you're free." She hit send and went back to the window. But before the story moves forward, it has to go back. Because what Andrew Rourke didn't know, what he couldn't have known, having chosen to know nothing for 19 years, was who he was calling about. Who Marcus Hale had become. And to understand that, you have to start at the beginning with a woman who was 23 years old and made the most expensive mistake of her life. She believed completely and without reservation that Andrew Rourke was exactly who he appeared to be. They met junior year at a university in Philadelphia in October, when everything feels temporarily possible. Natalie was pre-law, the kind of student who treated a syllabus like a contract. Andrew Rourke was in the business program, easy in his skin, the kind of person who made standing in line feel like something worth doing. He made her laugh when she wasn't expecting it. That was the whole foundation. One unguarded moment and she decided he was worth knowing. For a while he was. That part matters because it's the part that made everything else so hard to name when it started going wrong. He wasn't performing warmth in those early years, or if he was, the performance had become indistinguishable from the real thing. He showed up. He listened, or did something close enough to listening that she couldn't tell the difference. When her father had a health scare, the spring of senior year, Andrew drove her to her parents' house in Montgomery County at 11 at night without being asked. She stored that away as evidence of who he was, not yet understanding that character reveals itself most clearly under pressure, and the real pressure hadn't come yet. They moved in together after graduation and married the following year, a courthouse ceremony downtown. A small dinner afterward at Carol and Frank Hale's house in Montgomery County, with the dining room table extended as far as it would go. Andrew's parents lived out in western Pennsylvania and didn't make the drive. He said they had their reasons. She didn't push. She told herself it was just distance, just logistics, just the kind of thing that happens with families that weren't built the way hers was. She loved him with the specific confidence of someone who had grown up in a house where people said what they meant and did what they said. That kind of love doesn't leave much room for doubt. It assumes the person on the other side is operating by the same rules. That assumption was, in her case, the most expensive thing she ever got wrong. The pregnancy was planned or close enough. They had talked about it, looked at other people's children in the park, and exchanged the kind of glance that means someday. When the test came back positive, she was genuinely happy, and when she told him and he smiled, she was certain the smile was real. She held on to that certainty longer than she should have. The shift didn't announce itself. That's the particular cruelty of damage that actually lasts. It doesn't arrive in a moment you can point to later. It arrives the way a wall develops a crack, barely visible at first, then a little wider. Then one day you press your hand against it and feel it give. He started coming home late. Once, then regularly, then almost every night. Work, he said. A project. A client with difficult hours. She believed him the way you believe someone when the alternative costs more than you have, and at 6 months pregnant she didn't have much available. She was tired, past tired, and she needed him to be who she thought he was. The receipt was in the pocket of his jacket when she went to hang it up a restaurant downtown they'd never been to together. A Saturday night charge for dinner for two with a bottle of wine neither of them had mentioned. She asked him about it that evening and watched his face. He didn't hesitate. "Client dinner," he said. "You know how it is." He said it the way you say something completely reasonable, which is the most dangerous kind of lie, not the kind that needs maintenance, but the kind that sounds exactly like what a careful person would say. She looked at him and saw something behind his eyes she couldn't name precisely. Something sealed, like ice over water that's still moving underneath. She told herself it was the pregnancy making her read into things. She told herself a lot of things that fall, and she believed most of them because she wanted to and because she didn't yet know what believing them was going to cost her. Her supervisor sent her home early on a Wednesday in November, 8 months in low blood pressure. Slight dizziness, nothing dangerous but nothing to push through. She took the bus. She was thinking about lying down. That was the full extent of what she was thinking about. The apartment door was unlocked. Andrew was in the front hallway with his phone to his ear, talking quietly, and he stopped talking the moment he saw her. She noticed two things at once, his expression and the suitcase standing against the wall near the door. She had walked past it, coming in, and registered it the way you register something that doesn't pass, yet filed it away, moved on. Now she understood it. His expression was not guilt. She had expected something like guilt, and what she saw instead was colder and more deliberate. Resolution. A man who had been waiting for a version of this moment and decided, looking at her standing in the hallway in her coat, that this one would do. He put his phone in his pocket. He said, "We need to talk." She took off her coat. She went to the kitchen table and sat down and folded her hands over her stomach. The baby moved once, a slow push from the inside, and she pressed her palms flat and waited. He stood in the doorway and said he couldn't do it. He'd thought he was ready. He wasn't. He said it, the way someone says something rehearsed enough times that the rehearsal has replaced the feeling. Then he said, "You and this baby are destroying my life. I filed for divorce this morning." The clock on the microwave read 2:17. A car alarm was going off somewhere on the street below. She looked at him and understood with a clarity that felt almost physical that he had packed that suitcase before she came home. He hadn't known she'd be back early, he had simply been ready. Ready for whatever day she walked through that door. She said one word. "Fine." He stared at her. He had prepared for tears or a fight or something to push back against. "Fine" gave him nothing. She asked for an hour to get the rest of her things and called her mother. Carol Hale arrived 40 minutes later. She didn't ask questions. She came through the door, looked at her daughter once, and put her arms around her in the hallway without saying a word. Then she picked up the heaviest bag. They walked out together, while Andrew sat somewhere in the back of the apartment with his phone. He did not come out. The door pulled shut behind them with a small, ordinary click, the kind of sound a door makes 1,000 times in its life and means nothing. She had spent 8 months preparing for every hard thing she could imagine. She hadn't prepared for "fine" to be the bravest word she'd say that year. But it was, and everything that came after it was built on that one quiet syllable. Marcus was born on a Thursday in December, 6 days before Christmas, at Jefferson Hospital in Philadelphia, with Carol on one side of the bed and a nurse who had seen everything and remained productively unimpressed. He came in loud and dark-haired and large, with the expression of someone who had already assessed the situation and found it inefficient. The nurse laughed. Natalie held him against her chest and cried, not from grief exactly, but from something that had been compressed for months, finally releasing all at once. Her father was in the waiting room. Andrew was not there. He didn't call. Divorce papers arrived by mail 3 weeks later, and she signed them at her parents' kitchen table in Montgomery County without reading them. Her attorney told her she was making a mistake. She didn't have the energy to disagree. She never filed for child support. She knew in the abstract this was probably another mistake, but the abstract felt very far away that year. And what felt real was the need to move forward without spending what little she had left on a fight with no guaranteed return. Her parents helped. Frank watched Marcus in the mornings. Carol took the afternoons. Natalie went back to her firm 5 months after the birth, and they took her back without making her ask twice, because she was good and they knew it. The years that followed were lean but not broken, the specific tightness of one income and a young child, the kind of daily arithmetic that eventually becomes second nature. Marcus grew. That's the short version. The longer version is the one that matters. His fourth-grade teacher called on a Wednesday afternoon confusion rather than concern in her voice. "Your son doesn't turn in his homework," she said, "but on every test he's solving problems we haven't covered yet." Natalie transferred him to an advanced program the following semester, and something in him opened up the way a person opens up when they've been in a room that was slightly too small and someone finally unlocks the door. Math, then physics, then programming, he moved through all of it with a quiet, concentrated hunger that had nothing to do with wanting to be seen. He was just hungry for it. At 16, he placed first in the regional computer science Olympiad. At 17, he won the state championship, called Natalie from the parking lot afterward, in a voice as level as if he were reporting a completed errand, said, "First place, I've got practice talk later," and hung up. He boxed through high school, not competitively, just consistently, 3 afternoons a week. His coach told Natalie once, "Most kids get angry in there. Your son just gets quiet and thinks." At 18, he was accepted to Drexel's computer science program on a merit scholarship, one of the stronger incoming academic records in his cohort. By 19, he was already running freelance development contracts on the side, found himself, managed himself, completed without any apparent cost to his coursework. Natalie found out from a classmate of his who mentioned it, assuming she already knew. When she asked Marcus about it, he seemed genuinely puzzled by why it required a conversation. "It's just work," he said. "It's normal to work." By that November, his savings exceeded anything Natalie had managed in her first full year at the firm. She used to watch him sleep when he was small, 3-4 years old, completely abandoned to it the way young children are, and think, "You have no idea what you were born into." And somehow she already knew, without being able to explain why, that he was going to be fine. She didn't know how fine. She couldn't have. But she knew. Andrew Rourke had been absent for 19 years. He had no idea who he was about to walk into a room with. Marcus called Andrew the morning after Natalie told him. She found out that evening when he mentioned it the way he mentioned most things as a fact, briefly without ceremony. He'd set a meeting for Friday afternoon at a cafe near their neighborhood, his choice of location. She didn't ask why that particular place. She suspected he'd chosen it the way he chose most things because he'd already thought it through. They drove over together after his last Friday class. His car was a used Honda he'd bought sophomore year, with his own money, nothing impressive, everything functional. The city outside the windows was the usual November grey streets, wet from an earlier rain, the light going flat by 4 in the afternoon. Natalie told him she was nervous. He glanced over from the driver's seat and said, "You don't need to be. He's the one who should be nervous today." He said it without drama, the way you state something that simply appears to be true, then looked back at the road. Andrew was already there, window table facing the door, arrived early to be settled when they walked in. He looked older than the voice on the phone had suggested. Not badly kept, but worn in the specific way of someone who has been maintaining the surface, past the point where the structure beneath it can fully hold. She registered this quickly. Then Marcus walked in behind her, and she watched Andrew's face change. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet recalibration of a man who had prepared for one conversation and was now looking at something else entirely. Marcus was taller than him, broad-shouldered, without being heavy, standing the way people stand when they're not thinking about how they're standing. He looked at Andrew with complete level attention, not hostile, not warm, just present the way you look at something you've come to understand rather than something you're trying to get through. They sat. Andrew began with an explanation. Youth. Fear. He wasn't asking for absolution, he understood that wasn't available. But he wanted Marcus to know. Marcus let him finish. Then he said, "I just want to make sure we're working from the same facts." And he walked Andrew through the sequence, no heat in it, no performance, the way someone confirms a timeline before proceeding. You planned this, child. You got scared. You put a pregnant woman out of her home. You paid nothing for 19 years. You made no contact. That's the sequence. Andrew opened his mouth. Marcus said, "I'm not interrupting you. I want us both to be clear about what this conversation is starting from." He picked up his water, took a drink, set it down. "Go ahead." Andrew went ahead. And eventually, after the explanations had run their course, he arrived at the real reason. Financial trouble. Serious. He thought maybe Marcus could help him out. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, took out his wallet, and left enough cash on the table for the water. He looked at Andrew and said, "You didn't want to know me when things were good. Now that they're bad, you remembered I exist. I'm not a bank. And whatever the word son might have obligated, you ended that yourself. 19 years ago, by choice." He looked at Natalie. "Ready." She never taught him to do that. Never explained how to hold someone at precise distance using nothing but accuracy and calm. He came to it from somewhere she's never been able to fully locate. She's thought about it since. She still doesn't know where it came from. In the car, on the way home, Marcus said he'd suspected money from the start. People don't come back after 19 years because they missed you. He said it the way you note something self-evident, then asked what she wanted for dinner. Andrew Rourke was not the kind of man who accepted an answer he hadn't prepared for. By Monday morning, he had found a different approach entirely. The call came 3 days after the cafe. Natalie was at her desk in Center City working through a client file when her phone buzzed with his number. She picked up. His voice had changed again. Not the flat, rehearsed quality of that first November call, not the quiet desperation of the cafe. Something tighter, the sound of a person who has committed to a decision past the point of second-guessing it. He said he was filing a motion to establish paternity officially through Philadelphia Family Court. She said nothing. He kept going. And simultaneously he paused here, letting the pause carry weight. He intended to pursue adult financial support under Pennsylvania's filial responsibility statute. He was currently out of steady work. He had significant debts. Marcus had documented income. He believed he had legal standing. She got up and walked to the window. Center City below her ordinary Monday morning, the city moving through its work week without interest in what was happening on the 14th floor. She let him finish. Then she said, "Thank you for letting me know." She ended the call and stood at the window another moment before going back to her desk. She had been practicing family law for 20 years. She knew the Pennsylvania filial responsibility statute well, its uses, its limits, where it held and where it didn't. Pennsylvania was one of a minority of states where such a statute existed at all, and it had real teeth in the right circumstances. Andrew's claim wasn't baseless. That was the first thing she acknowledged to herself, because 20 years of practice had taught her that underestimating an opponent's position was how you lost cases you should have won. He had surface logic. He had a statute. What he didn't have was a clean path through it. She called Marcus at lunch and told him everything in order without editorializing. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a brief silence. "Then is he serious?" "Not quite a question." She said, "It appeared so." He said, "Okay, walk me through how it actually works." She did. He asked if she needed help. She said no. "This is my field." He said, "I figured. Let me know if that changes." That evening she sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and worked through it from the structure in. The statute existed and Andrew's claim had genuine surface logic, but 3 pressure points made the position significantly weaker than he appeared to understand. First, the statute carried an explicit exception for parental abandonment. A parent who had demonstrably failed their obligations could be denied support. Andrew had paid nothing for 19 years, sought no contact, and made no attempt to be present in any form. That was documented, sustained, deliberate absence, not misfortune. Second, claiming inability to work required actual medical documentation of disability, not unemployment or debt. He would need to prove incapacity, not just difficulty. Third, and most valuable, in Marcus's first year of life, Andrew had filed a motion to contest paternity in family court. He had gone voluntarily to legally disown his infant son. The DNA confirmed paternity. The court denied the motion. That filing had been sitting in the record for nearly 19 years. It was about to become the most useful document she had, not because it proved biology, but because it proved intent. A frightened young father doesn't go to court to disown his child. A man making a deliberate choice does. 20 years earlier, she had signed her own divorce papers without reading them because she had nothing left for anything more. The person sitting at that kitchen table was not that person. Not even close. The formal filings came through the court's electronic system 4 days after Andrew's call, two motions filed together exactly as described. Natalie forwarded them to Howard Bellman that afternoon and called to ask if he had time that week. He made time the next morning. Howard's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Chestnut Street that had been there long enough to feel like it had always been there. Bookshelves to the ceiling, a desk built for decades of serious use, the smell of old paper and good coffee. He ground himself every morning because, as he'd told Natalie once, some things were worth doing right. 30 years in Pennsylvania, family law. He knew the filial responsibility statute the way you know a road you've driven in every condition. She laid out the situation from the beginning, and he listened without moving, with the complete attention of someone who understood that interrupting a good brief was a waste of everyone's time. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully constructed. Someone with real knowledge helped him put this together. He confirmed their position was strong but needed documentation that was airtight rather than merely correct. He had a contact at a civil records office who could pull Andrew's full judgment history. He'd make the call that afternoon. What came back over the following days assembled into a portrait she hadn't fully had before. After their divorce, Andrew had remarried within 2 years. A woman 5 years older owned her condo in Rittenhouse, outright stable career in hospital administration. They lasted about 8 years. The divorce was contested. He filed to claim a share of her property on the basis of household contributions, and the court disagreed. After that, a retail management position that lasted 18 months, a sales role that lasted less, a specialty import business that accumulated significant debt before collapsing. 3 civil judgments currently active against him. Total owed north of $80,000. He had been working cash jobs to keep his accounts from being seized. Natalie read through all of it at her kitchen table on a Thursday evening. Not a man who had made one bad decision under pressure 19 years ago. A man who had spent his adult life making the same fundamental decision in different forms that whoever was nearby with more stability was obligated to absorb the weight of his choices. The phone rang that same Friday night while she was still at the table. Unknown number. A woman's voice, direct, tired, not performing anything. "You're Natalie Hale," she said. "Andrew Rourke's first wife." Natalie said yes. The woman said, "I'm Renee." His second. A pause from both of them, the specific pause of two people locating each other across an unexpected distance. Renee had heard what Andrew was doing. He had apparently discussed his plan with people, and word had moved through circles smaller than he'd assumed. She wanted to give a statement. Over the next 20 minutes, she described without bitterness just the exhausted clarity of someone who has carried something long enough to set it down. The years of their marriage, his consistent orientation toward her income and stability, his multi-year effort after their divorce to extract financial compensation that went nowhere, his deep and apparently genuine belief that someone was always supposed to come through for him. "He doesn't think he's wrong," she said. "He genuinely believes someone owes him that." She agreed to put it in writing. The following week, Marcus submitted his own statement. 3 paragraphs, no more. The final one read, "A father is someone who shows up." Andrew Rourke did not show up. Biological fact and fatherhood are not the same thing, and I do not accept that one creates obligations where the other was entirely absent. 2 women who had never met, connected only by the fact that the same man had failed them in different decades, now appeared together in the evidence record. Natalie thought about that more than once before the hearing. It felt less like coincidence than like a kind of slow accounting, the kind that takes years to complete but eventually does. They arrived at Philadelphia Family Court 20 minutes early on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of December. Howard was already in the second-floor corridor with his files, drinking coffee from a paper cup with the ease of a man for whom this building had long since lost any particular atmosphere. Marcus sat on the wooden bench along the wall and looked at his phone, not from nerves, just occupying his hands while he waited for something he'd already decided how to handle. Natalie stood. She had been in this building more times than she could accurately count, always on the attorney's side, the side that knew the procedures, the clerks which elevators ran slow. Sitting at the respondent's table would be different. She had known this intellectually for weeks. Standing in the corridor that morning, she felt it become something more than intellectual. Andrew arrived about 10 minutes later, with his attorney, younger, competent, carrying a thin folder, and the expression of someone who understood the position wasn't strong, but intended to work the available angles. Andrew came down the corridor and saw them. He looked at Natalie first, then his gaze moved to Marcus and stayed. He stopped. He said Marcus's name. Marcus looked up from his phone. Andrew said, "I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him for a few seconds with the same level of attention he'd had at the cafe. Then he said, "Okay." Not forgiveness, not dismissal, the acknowledgement of someone who has received information and knows where to file it. He looked back at his phone. Andrew stood there a moment longer, then followed his attorney down the corridor. The courtroom was standard, high ceilings, fluorescent light, the smell of cleaning product and old wood that Natalie associated with every courthouse she'd ever worked in. The judge was a woman in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed with the economy of movement that comes from running proceedings where time is finite and most participants use more of it than they should. She opened the session and gave the room nothing it didn't need. Andrew's attorney presented the case cleanly. Paternity established by prior family court proceeding. Pennsylvania Filial Responsibility Statute applicable. Client currently without steady employment carrying substantial debt. Adult son with documented income. The argument had real legal surface area, and the attorney handled it professionally. Howard responded without raising his voice. 19 years with no child support payment documented. A family court motion filed by Andrew Rourke in the first year of Marcus's life seeking to contest paternity of his own infant son documented denied following DNA confirmation on the record. 0 contact across 19 years. The statute's abandonment exception applied directly. He laid it out in sequence without decoration and let the record carry its own weight. Then the judge looked at Andrew directly. "She said you had no contact with your son for 19 years. You're filing this motion now. Help me understand the timing." His attorney began to respond. The judge raised one hand, a small gesture, barely anything, and waited. The attorney stopped. Andrew said he had debts. He thought his son might be able to help. The judge noted for the record that the legal filing had followed a personal meeting at which the son had declined to provide financial assistance. She asked Andrew to confirm. He confirmed it. Across the table, his attorney looked at the surface in front of him with the expression of someone who understood exactly what had just happened and could not take it back. A father had confirmed on the record under oath that he had filed a legal motion because his son said no. Whatever the careful construction around the filing had been, that confirmation had walked straight through it. Renee's written statement was admitted over objection. Marcus's statement was read last by the court clerk, in the flat procedural tone used for everything regardless of content. When she reached the final paragraph, "A father is someone who shows up," the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when everyone present recognizes that the actual point has just been made. During recess, Andrew's attorney found Howard in the corridor. His client would withdraw the support claim if the respondents agreed not to pursue back child support arrears. Natalie listened to Howard relay this and said no. Both motions withdraw completely and unconditionally, or she pursues back support through every channel available to her. The attorney said he would need to confer with his client. The hearing was continued 1 week. In the elevator going down, Marcus looked at her and said, "You hungry? There's a place around the corner." They walked out into a cold grey December afternoon and found somewhere to eat. The hearing wasn't technically finished, but in that corridor upstairs, the math had already completed itself. The week that followed was quieter than she'd expected and in some ways harder. There was no further communication from Andrew's attorney, no counter-proposal, no request for extension, nothing. Just silence, which should have felt like a good sign, but felt instead like waiting for something she couldn't name. She went to work, handled other cases, came home. On the 4th evening, Marcus called to ask if she'd heard anything. She said, "Not yet." He said he'll fold. Give it another day or 2. He said it the way he said most things he was certain of, simply without needing her to agree. He was right. 2 days later, at 7:43 in the morning, a notification arrived on her phone. Both motions withdrawn. Unconditional. No attached terms, no counter-proposal, no further communication. Just the filing timestamp, and then its absence. Natalie was at the kitchen table with her coffee when it came through. She read it once and set her phone down. Marcus appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, hair still damp, reaching past her for the coffee maker. She told him. He poured his cup, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. He thought about it the way he thought about most things without performing the process. Then he said that's the right outcome. Not a happy ending, not a tragedy. Just the right outcome. He drank his coffee. That was everything he said about it, and it was exactly enough. January brought something she hadn't anticipated. A man appeared at her office on a Tuesday afternoon, Gerald Rourke. Andrew's father, late 60s, good wool overcoat. The upright bearing of someone accustomed to being received as a person whose time mattered. He had not come to the wedding. He had not called when Marcus was born. He sat across from her desk now without waiting to be invited and explained that he wanted to discuss the situation with his son. Quietly. Person to person. Andrew was in a genuinely difficult position. Marcus was clearly doing well. Surely something could be worked out without further difficulty. She let him finish. Then she walked him through it without theatre or anger, just the facts in sequence. No one in the Rourke family had contributed a single day or a single dollar to Marcus's life in 19 years. She understood Gerald loved his son. That wasn't in dispute. But Marcus had built everything he had without any of them, and she was not in the business of compensating absence after the fact. Gerald adjusted his coat, and looked at her for a moment before leaving. He said, "You're a strong person." She said, "I had to be." The door closed and she went back to work. In February, Renee called and asked if Natalie had time for coffee. They found a quiet place in Rittenhouse on a Tuesday morning, an hour between other things for both of them. Renee wrapped her hands around her cup and said there was something she hadn't included in her written statement, not because she'd hidden it, but because she hadn't been certain it belonged there. She was certain now. 12 years ago, after their divorce, Andrew had gone through a difficult stretch. A mutual friend had told Renee that during that period he had said once to someone, in the way things get said, when a person has stopped managing themselves carefully, that leaving Marcus was the only thing he had ever genuinely regretted. The only thing. Natalie sat with that for a moment. Then she thanked Renee, and they finished their coffee and talked about other things. She told Marcus that evening at the kitchen table without framing it as more or less than it was. He listened all the way through. Then he said regretting something and showing up for it aren't the same thing. But I'm glad you told me. He didn't bring it up again. Neither did she. March brought one final move from Andrew, an anonymous post on a social media account, the kind of channel that ran one-sided grievances to a few thousand followers. He didn't name anyone directly, but the details were specific enough that several people who knew Natalie sent her the link within the same morning. A vindictive mother. A son kept from the truth. A man who had tried to reconnect and been shut out. Marcus saw it before she could call him. He texted, "Can I respond?" Publicly. My name on it. She asked to see the draft first. He sent it that evening, 3 paragraphs, his name at the top, no anonymity. Dates. Specific facts. A reference to the court record, which was public. And a closing line she read twice before putting her phone down. I wasn't kept in the dark. I was raised honestly. Those are different things. She wrote back one word, yes. The original post disappeared within the week. Andrew went quiet, not gradually, just gone the way the whole thing had arrived without announcement. 3 doors had closed. The legal one, the personal one, his father had tried to reopen, and the public one, Andrew had cracked himself. None of it had required volume. From the cafe to the courtroom to the last deleted post, the only thing it had ever needed was clarity, applied consistently until there was nothing left for him to stand on. In April, on an evening when Marcus had stopped by after class, he told her he didn't regret that Andrew had appeared. She looked at him. He said before there were questions, not angry ones, just ones that sat there quietly. Now there aren't. I know the whole story. I met him. I heard him. There's nothing left to wonder about. He said it simply and didn't ask her to respond. She didn't. Some things just need to be received. Katie had been in the picture longer than Natalie had known. She'd sent a message back in the fall, careful sentences from someone who wasn't sure she was doing the right thing but decided to write anyway. "He's an extraordinary person," she'd written. "I think that's because of you." Natalie had turned those two sentences over more than once in the months since. In May, Marcus brought her to dinner. She was warm and direct, and a little nervous in the way of someone who genuinely cared how the evening went. By the end of the night, she knew where the extra napkins were kept, and had washed her own dishes without being asked. Natalie noticed both things, and said nothing about either. June came. Marcus turned 20 at Carol and Frank's house in Montgomery County. The backyard Frank's grill that had been in the same corner for 15 years. The same folding table that came out for every occasion, large enough to require it. His friends filled the yard with noise. Katie moved between the kitchen and the outside with the ease of someone settling into a new place. Frank held court at the grill. Carol put food on everyone's plate without consulting anyone about whether they wanted it. At some point in the afternoon, Natalie stepped back and just watched. Marcus was across the yard, laughing at something one of his friends had said. A full, unguarded laugh, the kind she'd always loved most in him, because it arrived rarely enough to mean something. She thought, "I didn't know if I could do it." 8 months pregnant, 1 suitcase, 1 word. Standing in that backyard in June with the smell of charcoal and cut grass, and the sound of her son laughing across the yard, now she knew. Later, after the guests had gone and the yard had settled into quiet, she sat alone on the back porch with a glass of lemonade going warm in her hand, listening to Marcus and Katie talking somewhere inside the house and Frank and Carol moving around the kitchen and the ordinary sounds of a summer evening doing what summer evenings do. She thought about the word fine. How little it had seemed to contain when she said it. How much room it had turned out to hold. Andrew Rourke had called it his right. But some rights have to be earned, and 19 years of silence has a way of answering for itself. If someone from your past ever came back after years of absence and claimed what they'd walked away from, what would you have done?